We continue our reading and reflection on the Mahabharata. This is chapter 5, titled The Swayamvara at Kashi. And this is also the chapter where the great battle between Bhishma and Parasurama is fought. And it is one of the first times that Parasurama actually suffers a kind of defeat, and which again tells you how powerful a warrior Bhishma was. By the end of this chapter, I will also be reading a short essay that I wrote about Bhishma and how, despite all that was good about him, one of the issues was that he was often quick to make decisions, and this led to several issues, and was often led by his ego, or rather allowed his ego to get the better of him. I will read that essay at the end of this chapter, because we will also see that his oath that he took in order to help his father Shantanu marry Satyavati also meant that the line of Kurus lost what could have been one of their greatest kings ever, and the question of whether that was Rajadharma needs to be asked. But first, let's read chapter 5. Like I said, titled Swayamvara at Kashi. The young prince Vichitravirya was now the center of Satyavati's hopes. He was her only son. Bhishma was a father to him. Years passed. The time came when Bhishma thought of his marriage, that is Vichitravirya's marriage. The king of Kasi had 3 lovely daughters, Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika. These princesses, thought Bhishma, were fit enough to be the brides for his brother. Then there came to him news that the king of Kasi was holding a Swayamvara for his daughters. Bhishma could not brook the insult offered him. It had been the custom to give the daughters of Kasi to the princes of the Kuru house. Bhishma resented this departure from the usual custom. He descended on the city where the Swayamvara was being held. As we can see, here is another instance where Bhishma is taking an impulsive decision. The Swayamvara is a fairly accepted tradition for princesses, at least, to choose their husbands, and therefore for Bhishma to resent this and to expect the tradition to be followed, and the princesses to be handed over to the Kuru prince alone in marriage is somewhat dicey, and his decision to go himself instead of sending Vichitravirya also is questionable. We'll continue reading. The preparations for the Swayamvara were indeed thorough. Kings from all over Bharatavarsha had come to attend it. The hall was bright with the jewels worn by the princes who had assembled there. The air was thick with the perfume of the flowers which they were wearing. They all saw Bhishma. There were smiles of derision, sneers, and contemptuous remarks. Some said, "Look at this Devavrata, the confirmed bachelor who has come to the Swayamvara of these lovely princesses. Indeed, who can resist the law of nature? Their beauty is enough to weaken the austerities of even rishis. What then can we say of a poor mortal like Devavrata? He has forgotten the oath he took to satisfy his father. He has come hoping that he may be chosen by one of the princesses. Vain hopes. What vanity he has. Who will look at this man well past the prime of youth, when we are all here?" Here again, we see the error Bhishma has made in himself coming to the Swayamvara instead of sending Vichitravirya, because these are comments that are fairly common. It is human tendency to mock and make fun of people who have taken some decisions and then seemingly appear to have gone against the decision. Though in this case, Bhishma was not attending the Swayamvara in order to marry the princesses himself, but was coming on behalf of Vichitravirya. which, like I said, is again questionable. We will continue reading. A voice like the clap of thunder greeted the kings who had assembled. Bhishma said, "Indeed, I have come to the Swayamvara. I am going to carry these maidens to Hastinapura. They will be the brides of my brother Vichitravirya, the Kuru monarch. They will be queens of the Kuru house. If you have valor enough, bravery enough, you are welcome to rescue them from me. I am prepared to fight anyone who will dare to oppose me." Bhishma took the princesses one by the hand and placed them in his chariot. He was ready to proceed towards his home. The kings were furious. The king of Kasi looked at them for help. They all rushed at the departing prince. Bhishma stopped his chariot. There ensued a fiery battle between the kings on the one side and Bhishma on the other. All of the kings were defeated easily. The chariot proceeded once again towards Hastinapura, the Kuru capital. The king of Salva was a great hero. He was one of the many who had come to attend the Swayamvara. He offered to fight with Bhishma. His fighting was of no mean order. He wounded Bhishma in the chest. Everyone was amazed at the fighting of Salva, who was able to wound the great Bhishma. But this only enraged Bhishma further. Enraged at the challenge of Salva, Bhishma fought with more vigor than he had displayed so far. Bhishma killed the charioteer of Salva, then his horses. Salva was without a chariot and he was without a weapon. He was on the ground at the mercy of his opponent. In his nobleness, Bhishma left him without killing him and went unchallenged the rest of the way to Hastinapura. Bhishma arrived in the city. The people crowded in the streets to see the three maidens who looked like three moons in captivity. They were so very beautiful. The kings were soon reached. Bhishma descended from his chariot, the princesses following him. He reached the apartments of Satyavati. He stood them before her and said, "Look, mother, look at the brides I have brought for our Vichitravirya." Satyavati was pleased. The young prince was sent for. He looked at the maidens and was pleased. He looked with love and gratitude at Bhishma and fell at his feet. Bhishma embraced him and his eyes were wet with tears of love. He loved this brother of his as a father loves his son. And perhaps it is this that made him go instead of Vichitravirya, which again, like I've been saying, would have been the better choice. "Please, if I may say something," said a soft, frightened voice. Bhishma turned around. It was Amba, the eldest of the three princesses. With her form trembling like a leaf, she addressed the queen mother and Bhishma together. She said, "When my lord Bhishma entered the hall and carried us away by force, I was in the act of garlanding Salva. I had already chosen him as my husband. Why did you not tell me there?" asked Bhishma. "You should have told me before I left Kasi. Why were you silent?" "How could I, my lord?" said Amba. "You were so abrupt in your actions. Before I could gather up enough courage to talk, we were halfway through the journey. Hence, I thought I would speak now." Again, here we see that, Bhishma's actions, his impulsive nature meant that people were, and him being so powerful meant that people were scared to even talk to him when he was angry or when he was taking certain decisions. We will continue reading. They were all upset by these new complications which had set in. The young prince said, "I do not think it is right to marry a woman whose heart is in the keeping of someone else." Bhishma and Satyavati felt that he was right. Bhishma then spoke to Amba and said, "You have chosen a husband already. We do not think it right to keep you here. I will provide the proper escort for you. You are at liberty to go to Salva." With a heart full of love, Amba reached the kingdom of Salva. She went to the king and said, "Look at me, my lord. In the Swayamvara hall, I was in the act of garlanding you when Bhishma carried us all away. When we reached Hastinapura, I told him that I had already chosen my husband. The noble Bhishma sent me to you. Please accept me. With a loud laugh, Salva said, accept you? Do you think I'm a beggar to accept gifts from my enemy? Devavrata took you by your right hand. He won you in battle. He defeated all of us. According to the dharma of Kshatriyas, the man who wins a girl in the fight is her lord. Bhishma is your lord. He is your husband. Go to him. Ask him to marry you. I cannot accept you. With a heart filled with pain and humiliation, Amba retraced her steps to Hastinapura and stood in the presence of Bhishma. Tears were running down her face. Bhishma was shocked at the condition of the young girl. He said, what ails thee, fair maiden? I'm surprised to see you here. I sent you to Salva. Why have you come back? Amba said, my journey was fruitless. I am now richer in the knowledge of Dharma Shastra. Salva looks on me as his sister. He says that a man who wins a girl in fight is her lawful husband. You took me by my right hand and placed me in your chariot and later fought with all the kings there. You, I hear, must marry me. I have no one now. You must grant me life. Let not my womanhood be wasted. Please marry me. Here is a conundrum. What does Bhishma do? He has taken an oath that he took to please his father Shantanu so that Shantanu could marry Satyavati. And the terrible oath that turned him into Bhishma from Devavrata. How could he break that oath now? Continuing the reading, Bhishma was overcome with compassion for the woman who stood weeping in front of him. His heart went out to her in pity. He could not speak, for tears were choking him, tears that he dared not shed. He was sorry for this woman whose life was ruined because of him. As you can see, Bhishma himself is now realizing that he should have been more careful in taking his decisions, and he needn't have been that impulsive. He spoke to her gently. He said, I am grieved at the way things have taken shape, but I cannot marry you. You know that I have sworn to be a brahmacharin all my life. How can I marry you? Please abandon those thoughts from your mind. It is not possible. If you had only told me in Kasi that you had already chosen your husband, these things would not have happened. But no one can control fate. You can never be my bride. You can go back to Salva and coax him to marry you. I cannot help you out of your predicament. I would have if things had been different. But now, bound as I am by my terrible oath, I cannot help you in the manner you suggest. Bhishma walked away from her presence. Now, this is easy for Bhishma to say, but Amba is in a terrible state because neither will Salva accept her, nor can she go back to her father, nor was Bhishma accepting her, nor can she marry Vichitravirya. And as we continue reading, she goes through more trouble. Poor, ill-starred Amba spent 6 years thus without avail. With a heart full of hatred for Bhishma, who was the cause of her unhappiness, she went to the forest. She met several ascetics there. She told them the story of her life and expressed her desire to stay with them and perform penance. They were very dubious. They did not want a young, unmarried woman in their midst. They did not know what they were to do. To their great relief, there came to their hermitage the great Otravahana, the grandfather of Amba. He heard about her tragedy. He spoke comforting words to her. He said, the great Bhargava is a great friend of mine. Bhargava is the guru of Bhishma. He will command his pupil to obey you. He will command his people to obey him. He will make Bhishma marry you. Bhishma cannot disobey his guru. Bhargava here is a reference to Parasurama. A few days later, Bhagavan Bhargava came to the forest. Hotravahana told him about the pathetic story of Amba. The great sage was sorry for her and said, I will certainly speak to Bhishma about it. If I ask him to marry you, he will certainly obey me. He sent for his beloved pupil Bhishma. Hearing that his guru wanted him, Bhishma hurried to his presence. He fell at his feet and said, why have you sent for me? Bhargava raised him and embraced him. He said, my child, I want you to help a person in distress. Do you see this beautiful woman? Bhishma turned around and looked at Amba. He said, I know her, my lord. She is a woman who has been cheated by fate. She wanted to marry Salva, but he would not have her. I could not, since I have sworn not to marry. Hence, she had to leave Hastinapura and go away. But what has she got to do with my coming to your presence? Bhargava said, I have promised to her that I would make you marry her. You must help me to keep my word. Here is another conundrum. Bhishma loved his guru, and here was his own guru telling him to marry Amba, but he had also taken the terrible oath. And therefore he says, my lord, you know about the terrible oath I've taken. I cannot marry. Even if you ask me to, I cannot marry. He turned his pained eyes on his guru and looked at him. Bhargava tried his best to convince Bhishma that his duty was to obey the commands of his guru, but it was not possible for him to convince Bhishma. He was firm. Bhargava was furious with him. He said, I will curse you, or else you must fight a duel with me. Bhishma was in a dilemma. He loved his guru. He did not want to be cursed by Bhargava. That was the dread alternative. He had to choose. He preferred to fight. He said, my lord, you know how much I love you. You asked me to fight with you. I would rather fight with you rather than be cursed by you. I do not want to be cursed by you, not by you who love me. And therefore I shall fight. A terrible battle was fought between these two. It was watched by the lords of the heavens too. The battle raged for days and nights. There was no lessening of the valor of either. On the last day of the fight, Bhishma decided to send the astra called Prashvapa. That meant the destruction of the world. The gods, led by Narada and Rudra, intervened and said, Bhishma, stop this fighting. Do not send the astra. You are not the person to destroy the world. It has to be done by someone else. They convinced him that he should be the first to withdraw from the fight, since it would be an insult to his guru if he was made to stop first from fighting. Bhishma agreed. The fight was stopped. Bhargava embraced his pupil and said, you are the greatest fighter, the greatest of all fighters. I could not defeat you. He turned to Amba and said, my child, I tried my best as you saw. I cannot shake Bhishma's resolution. He will not move away from the path of truth. Please go away. Your desire is not to be achieved. This ends chapter 5, and as we have seen, it's another tragical end to it, particularly tragic, particularly a huge tragedy for Amba because she's left in the lurch. And if we analyze this very carefully, we will see that all of it is because of Bhishma's impulsive decisions. And it is in this context that I said I would read the essay that I wrote about Bhishma called Bhishma, the Superego. And this was written in the context of the Vishnu Sahasranama, but it's still relevant here. And I read, Bhishma is symbolic of the superego, the giant ego that is so taken in by its own image of its greatness that it sees nothing but its own virtues. When it stares at its own reflection, all it sees is its own projection of itself, minus the warts. Why would Devavrata make that pratignya, that oath which gave him his name, that made him into Bhishma? He was a master of Rajadharma, and Rajadharma demanded that he take his rightful place as the next king of Hastinapura. Shantanu and his desire, meaning Shantanu's desire, was only an excuse. The larger, more critical reason was to massage his own ego, that he would make this giant sacrifice that would immortalize him across time. Even in his previous life as one of the 8 Vasus, he was the chief protagonist, due of the ill-fated attempt to capture Vasishta's cow Nandini. Then too his ego got the better of him, and the curse was particularly harsh on him, a long and largely painful existence on earth. His ego continued to manifest in many other ways, be it the abduction of the princesses Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika, which was the subject of chapter 5 that we read just now, or the choice of his dress and overall presentation, the all-white dress including the armor and weapons which added to his fair complexion. That is why he was called Shvetavira, the white warrior. He had to stand out and be seen as distinct and distinguished. In battle, recall how Vyasa says that the all-white Bhishma stood out starkly in the hustle and bustle of battle. His refusal to fight Shikandi, even if it meant the destruction of the armies of Duryodhana, all manifestations of an ego that was so caught up in itself. When Krishna says that there can be no victory for Dharma, that is the Pandava side, without the killing of Bhishma, he knows what he's saying. Furthermore, at an allegorical level, it is a message that no progress can be made unless the ego is shot down. In that sense, Bhishma is the chattering ego in Arjuna's head that prevents him from seeking the truth and getting the job done. When you examine the 18-day battle carefully, it is a play of what Krishna tells Arjuna in the Gita, also 18 chapters long. These warriors are already dead, Arjuna, says Krishna, and that is how it ends, with 5 on one side and 3 on the other. On the 10th day, when Bhishma is brought down, hundreds of arrows have to be shot, and even then he does not die, lying on his bed of arrows. Every last drop of sap sucked out of him. At one point in the battle, Krishna is so frustrated with Arjuna's reluctance to fight Bhishma that he picks up a chariot wheel and advances on Bhishma. It is the Dharma Chakra and advances on Bhishma. The wheel is symbolic. Held vertically, it is the Dharma Chakra, the wheel of samsara, and when on the horizontal plane, it is the flying discus of liberation that severs the earthly connection. When Krishna advances, Bhishma steps forward. The ego demands the grand death at the hands of the greatest Kshetrajna. But Krishna does not grant him that. In finally placing Shikandi in front of Arjuna, Krishna delivers the final blow to the ego. For several days more, every last drop is drained out of him, and it is then that Krishna says that he is one with Bhishma. And it is then that Krishna asks Bhishma to chant the Vishnu Sahasranama, for he knows that now, finally, after so many years of struggle, Bhishma has finally found the truth. Therefore, when Bhishma speaks, it is actually Krishna who is speaking. We will continue reading. We have chapter 6, which is about Amba's attempts at revenge. But this ends chapter 5 and the reflective essay on that I thought was relevant to this chapter.